The sky over Germany, 1943. 20,000 feet above the earth, American B-17 bombers crawl through frozen air like slow-moving targets. Their engines drone. Their crews pray. Below them, the Nazi heartland. Above them, nothing but clouds and dread. Then they come. Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Focke-Wulf 190s. Sleek. Fast. Deadly. They dive from the sun like hawks on sparrows. Their cannons tearing through aluminum skin. Through dreams. Through boys who'd never see home again. American fighters try to follow. Try to protect. But their fuel runs out. Their range is too short. They peel away, returning to England, leaving the bombers alone in the wolf's den. The losses are catastrophic. Entire squadrons vanish in a single mission. Mothers receive telegrams. Wives become widows. The 8th Air Force is bleeding out over Europe, and no one knows how to stop it. Except one man, a quiet engineer in California, a German immigrant with soft eyes and a sharp mind. A man who left his homeland to escape the very darkness now swallowing the skies. His name is Edgar Schmued, and in a small drafting room in Inglewood, he's sketching something the world has never seen. Plain. No, a revolution. Sleek as a blade. Fast as vengeance. Beautiful as a deadly prayer. The P-51 Mustang. But here's the secret history won't tell you. The first Mustang wasn't enough. It was good, but not great. Fast, but not fast enough. The Nazis were still faster. Still deadlier. Still winning. So Schmued did something no one thought possible. He tore apart his own creation and rebuilt it from the soul outward, transforming a good fighter into an unstoppable predator. And when he was done, the P-51 became the plane that broke the Luftwaffe's back, cleared the skies, and saved a generation. The year is 1940, and the world is burning. Europe has fallen under the shadow of the swastika. France is conquered. Britain stands alone, battered by the Blitz, holding on by sheer will and Winston Churchill's defiant growl. Across the Atlantic, America watches, still neutral, still hesitant, but preparing for the storm everyone knows is coming. In a modest factory in Inglewood, California, a small aircraft company called North American Aviation receives an urgent request from the British. They need fighters, desperately. The Royal Air Force is losing planes faster than they can replace them. But there's a catch. North American has never built a fighter plane before. Only trainers. The British don't care. They're desperate. The company's president, James Dutch Kindleberger, takes the contract. But he knows he needs a genius to pull it off. He turns to a man few have heard of. A man who speaks with a German accent and thinks in equations and curves. Edgar Schmued. Born in Germany, trained in the old-world precision of European engineering, Schmued fled the rise of Hitler. He came to America with nothing but his mind and his hands. And now, those hands would sketch the machine that would help destroy the regime he escaped. Schmued had 120 days to design a completely new fighter from scratch. Most engineers would call it impossible. Schmued called it Tuesday. He assembled a small team. They worked in secrecy, in speed, in silence. No time for doubt. No room for error. Just drawings, calculations, wind tunnels, and coffee that tasted like gasoline. And slowly, impossibly, the Mustang took shape. When it first flew in October 1940, it was fast, maneuverable, and tough. The British loved it. The Americans noticed. But high above the clouds, where the air is thin and the enemy is ruthless, the early Mustang had one fatal flaw. Its engine couldn't perform at high altitude. And that's where the war was being fought. Schmued knew it, and it haunted him. Because every plane that fell, every pilot lost, he felt responsible. So he went back to the drawing board. And this time, he wouldn't stop until he built the fastest, deadliest, most beautiful fighter the world had ever seen. If you love real stories, full of emotion, courage, and secrets from the past, subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell. Leave a like to support this work and help this story reach more people. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this video from? I love knowing how far these stories travel. Edgar Schmued was not a loud man. He didn't bark orders or pound tables or demand attention. He was the kind of engineer who listened more than he spoke, who observed the world with quiet intensity, who saw problems not as walls but as puzzles waiting to be solved. Born in 1899 in Germany, he grew up in a nation obsessed with precision, with craftsmanship, with the marriage of art and engineering. His father was a craftsman. Young Edgar inherited his hands and sharpened them with education, studying aeronautical engineering in the years when flight itself was still a radical dream. But Edgar's Germany was changing. In the 1920s, the Weimar Republic crumbled under economic collapse and political chaos. By the early 1930s, a dark tide was rising: nationalism, anger, the twisted promise of a strong man who spoke of purity and power. Edgar Schmued saw it coming. He saw the banners, the rallies, the poison seeping into the streets, and he knew, with the quiet certainty of a man who trusts his instincts, that he had to leave. In 1930, Edgar immigrated to Brazil, then later to the United States. He arrived in America with little money, broken English, and an accent that would mark him as foreign for the rest of his life. But he also brought something else: a mind trained in the rigorous discipline of German engineering and a heart that still believed in freedom. He found work in the growing aviation industry, first with small companies, then with General Aviation, and finally with North American Aviation in California. There, in the golden light of Inglewood, he would find his purpose. When the British came calling in 1940, desperate for fighters, it was Schmued who took the lead. He gathered blueprints, studied every fighter in existence, the Spitfire, the Bf-109, the Hurricane, and asked himself one question: what would perfection look like? He didn't want a copy. He wanted to transcend. So he started with a clean sheet of paper and let physics, instinct, and artistry guide his pencil. The fuselage would be sleek, low-drag, almost sculpted. The wings would use a laminar flow airfoil, experimental and risky, but capable of reducing drag and increasing speed. The cockpit would sit far back, giving the pilot visibility and balance. In just 120 days, the NA-73X, the prototype of the P-51 Mustang, was born. It first flew on October 26, 1940, and it was immediately clear: this was no ordinary plane. Test pilots raved. It handled like a dream. It was fast, stable, responsive. The British ordered it into production, naming it the Mustang. For a moment, it seemed like Schmued had done the impossible. But war is unforgiving. And soon, reality delivered a harsh truth. The Mustang's Allison engine, while powerful at low altitude, choked and sputtered above 15,000 feet. And the war over Europe was happening at 25,000 feet and higher. American and British pilots flew the early Mustangs in ground attack roles, strafing trains and tanks, but they couldn't escort bombers deep into Germany. And that's where they were needed most. That's where boys were dying. Schmued knew it. He read the reports. He saw the loss numbers. And every night, alone in his small home, the weight of it pressed on his chest like a stone. He had built something beautiful, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The question that haunted him was simple, brutal, and urgent. How do I make it faster? How do I make it deadly at altitude? The answer would come, but it would require a radical transformation and an engine from across the ocean. The problem was brutal in its simplicity. Wrong engine, wrong war. The Allison V1710 that powered the early Mustang was a masterpiece at low altitude. Smooth, reliable, strong. But above 15,000 feet, where the air thinned and the cold bit deep, it gasped like a drowning man. The supercharger couldn't compensate. The power dropped. And in combat, power is survival. Without it, the Mustang was a thoroughbred with a broken leg. Magnificent but unable to run where the wolves hunted. The bombers flying deep into Nazi Germany needed escorts at 25,000 feet and higher. The early Mustang couldn't reach them, couldn't protect them, couldn't save them. Edgar Schmued knew the airframe was perfect. Every line, every curve, every rivet was optimized for speed and efficiency. The laminar flow wings sliced through air with minimal drag. The fuselage was sleek as a bullet. The control surfaces were balanced and responsive. Test pilots called it the sweetest handling fighter they'd ever flown. But sweetness doesn't win wars. Altitude does. Range does. The ability to climb high, fly far, and still have enough fuel and power to fight. That's what wins wars. And the Mustang, for all its beauty, didn't have it. Then, in early 1942, a British test pilot named Ronald Harker flew a Mustang and had an idea. Harker worked for Rolls-Royce, the company that built the Merlin engine, the same legendary power plant that drove the Supermarine Spitfire and saved Britain during the Battle of Britain. The Merlin was a two-stage, two-speed supercharged V12, a mechanical symphony designed to breathe fire at high altitude. Harker flew the Mustang, felt its grace, its potential, and immediately thought, what if we put a Merlin in this thing? It was a radical idea. The Mustang was American. The Merlin was British. Different mounts, different cooling systems, different everything. But Harker saw past the obstacles. He saw possibility. He sent a report to Rolls-Royce. They sent it to the Air Ministry. The Air Ministry sent it to North American Aviation. And Edgar Schmued read it with the focus of a man who'd been praying for a miracle and just found one in his mailbox. He didn't hesitate. He didn't doubt. He gathered his team and told them the plan. They were going to rip out the Allison and install the Merlin. It would require redesigning the engine mounts, the cooling system, the air intakes, the exhaust. It would require precision, innovation, and speed. Because the war wasn't waiting. The bombers were still falling. The clocks were still ticking. Schmued worked with Rolls-Royce and the U.S. Army Air Forces to obtain Merlin engines built under license by Packard in America. The Packard V1650 Merlin arrived in crates, heavy and potent, smelling of oil and steel. Schmued's team laid it beside the Mustang's fuselage like surgeons preparing for a heart transplant. The challenge was immense. The Merlin was heavier, longer, and required different cooling. Schmued redesigned the nose, lowered the thrust line, recalculated the center of gravity. He modified the radiator scoop under the fuselage, turning it into an ingenious system that didn't just cool the engine. It created additional thrust through the Meredith effect, using heated air as a tiny jet. Genius layered on genius. By late 1942, the first Merlin-powered Mustang, the P-51B, was ready for testing. When it roared to life on the tarmac, the sound was different, deeper, angrier. The Merlin didn't purr. It growled. Test pilot Bob Chilton climbed into the cockpit, taxied down the runway, and pushed the throttle forward. The Mustang leapt into the sky like it had been unchained. It climbed faster, higher, smoother than any American fighter before it. At 25,000 feet, where the Allison had wheezed, the Merlin sang. At 30,000 feet, it still had power to spare. Chilton dove, rolled, climbed again, and when he landed, his face was flushed with adrenaline and awe. "This," he said, "is the one." And he was right. The P-51B Mustang, with its Rolls-Royce Merlin heart beating inside Edgar Schmued's perfect airframe, was no longer just a fighter. It was a revolution. Could fly higher, faster, and farther than any fighter in the world. With drop tanks, it had a range of over 1,500 miles, enough to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It could dogfight with the best the Luftwaffe had and win. It was beautiful, deadly, and unstoppable. The plane that would change the war had finally arrived. The first P-51B Mustangs arrived in England in late 1943, crated and cold, like secrets wrapped in canvas. Ground crews uncrated them in the gray drizzle of English winter, their hands numb, their breath fogging in the air. They looked at the planes with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Hope because they'd heard the rumors, the whispers from test pilots about something special. Skepticism because they'd been disappointed before, had seen too many wonder weapons that weren't wonderful enough. But when the engines fired and the Merlins roared to life, something shifted in the air. The sound was different. This sound was fury wrapped in engineering. This sound was the sound of predators waking up. The pilots climbed into the cockpits with the weight of ghosts on their shoulders. Every fighter pilot in the 8th Air Force knew someone who hadn't come back. Every mission briefing had empty chairs. The bomber boys had it worse. Flying straight and level through flak and fighters, watching friends die in metal coffins at 25,000 feet. The fighters had tried to protect them, but the thunderbolts and lightnings ran out of fuel over France, forced to turn back while the bombers pushed deeper into Germany, alone. The pilots knew the math, knew the odds, knew that every mission into the Reich was a roll of the dice with death. But now, strapped into the Mustang, something felt different. The cockpit was tight, efficient, almost intimate. The controls responded with precision, like the plane was reading your mind. The visibility was extraordinary. The bubble canopy let you see above, behind, all around. And when you pushed the throttle forward and felt the Merlin's power surge through the airframe, you understood. This wasn't just another plane. This was a weapon built by someone who understood what you needed: speed, range, agility, and the confidence that when you met a Messerschmitt at 30,000 feet, you had the better ride. December 1943. The first long-range escort mission. P-51 Mustangs from the 354th Fighter Group lifted off from English airfields. Their wings heavy with drop tanks, their pilots tense with anticipation. The bombers, B-17 flying fortresses, droned ahead in tight formations, their contrails painting white scars across the winter sky. For the first time, American fighters stayed with them past the German border, past the point where they'd always had to turn back. The Luftwaffe came up to meet them, expecting the usual easy pickings. Bf-109s and FW-190s climbed through the clouds, hunting. Then they saw the Mustangs. First, confusion. What were American fighters doing this deep? Then, alarm. The Mustangs didn't run, didn't break off. They dove into the fight with a speed and aggression the Germans hadn't expected. Captain Don Blakesley, leading the 354th, called out targets over the radio, his voice calm and cold. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high. Let's go get them." The Mustangs rolled and dove, their Browning machine guns hammering, their speed carrying them through turns that left the German fighters wallowing. One Bf-109 exploded in a fireball. Another spun down, trailing smoke. A Focke-Wulf tried to dive away, the fastest escape tactic in the Luftwaffe playbook. But the Mustang stayed with it, matched it, then overhauled it and blew it apart. The bomber crews watched from above, stunned and grateful. For the first time in months, they weren't alone. For the first time, they had guardian angels with American stars on their wings, angels that could fight all the way to the target and all the way home. The loss rates began to drop. Morale began to rise. And in the frozen fields of East Anglia, ground crews painted kill marks on Mustang fuselages. Little swastikas that told a story of the tide beginning to turn. Edgar Schmued, back in California, received reports and photographs. He saw his creation in combat, saw it doing what it was born to do. And for the first time since the war began, he allowed himself a quiet, exhausted smile. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just saving bombers. It was breaking the Luftwaffe's spine, one dogfight at a time. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe knew the name, Mustang. They saw it in intelligence reports, heard it in pilot debriefings, felt it in the growing dread that spread through German fighter squadrons like a virus. The Americans had a new fighter, one that could fly farther, climb higher, and fight harder than anything they'd faced before. Experienced Luftwaffe aces, men who'd survived years of combat, who'd shot down Spitfires and Hurricanes and Thunderbolts, found themselves outmatched, outrun, outgunned. The rules of the air war, written in blood over 3 years of combat, were being rewritten by a plane designed by a German immigrant who'd chosen freedom over the fatherland. The strategic calculus shifted overnight. Before the Mustang, the 8th Air Force had been forced into a brutal equation. Bomb Germany and accept catastrophic losses, or don't bomb and lose the war. Entire bomber groups disappeared in single missions. On October 14, 1943, Black Thursday, 60 B-17s were shot down over Schweinfurt, with another 138 damaged. 600 airmen lost in one day. The campaign was unsustainable, the losses unbearable. But with the Mustang, the equation changed. Now the bombers had protectors that could go the distance, that could not only defend but hunt, that could turn the sky over Germany into a killing field for the Luftwaffe. In February 1944, the orders changed. General Jimmy Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, issued a directive that would reshape the air war. The fighters were no longer just to escort bombers, they were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever they found it. On the ground, in the air, over their own airfields, the Mustang pilots, already aggressive by nature, were unleashed. They flew ahead of the bomber stream, prowled the skies over Germany, strafed airfields, shot up trains, and engaged any enemy aircraft foolish enough to take off. They became hunters, and Germany became the hunting ground. The killing intensified. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer led formations of Mustangs deep into the Reich, hitting the Luftwaffe before they could even reach the bombers. They caught German fighters on takeoff when they were slow and vulnerable, their landing gear still retracting. They strafed aircraft on the ground, turning neat rows of parked Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs into burning wreckage. The Germans tried everything to counter them, new tactics, new formations, faster climbs, jet fighters, but the Mustang was too versatile, too numerous, and flown by pilots who'd learned to fight with cold precision and hot fury. Major George Preddy became the top Mustang ace in Europe, with 26.83 kills. He flew with an elegance that masked his lethality, positioning his plane with mathematical precision, firing in short, controlled bursts that conserved ammunition and ensured kills. His Mustang, named Cripes a Mighty Third, became famous, its nose art a symbol of American air power. Preddy didn't talk much about killing. None of them did. They talked about the plane, about how it responded, how it forgave mistakes, how it brought them home. But in their eyes, you could see the weight, the knowledge that every victory in the air meant someone else fell burning to the earth. The Luftwaffe began to crack. Experienced pilots were killed faster than they could be replaced. Fuel shortages grounded entire squadrons. Training programs shortened, sending boys into the sky with barely enough hours to know which lever did what. The Mustang pilots could tell the difference. The veterans fought smart, used clouds and sun and teamwork. The rookies panicked, broke formation, died quickly. It was a slaughter disguised as combat. And yet the Germans kept coming, because they had no choice, because their cities were burning, because orders from Berlin didn't accept the word impossible. By spring 1944, the Allies owned the sky over Europe, and the P-51 Mustang was the reason why. June 6, 1944. Dawn breaks over the English Channel, cold and gray and heavy with history. Below, an armada unlike anything the world has ever seen. 5,000 ships carrying the hopes and fears of the free world toward the beaches of Normandy. Above, the sky is alive with aircraft, bombers, transports, gliders, wave after wave, a river of metal flowing toward occupied France. And flying high cover, weaving through the clouds like silver guardians, are the Mustangs. They patrol in relays, engines throttled back to conserve fuel, eyes scanning for the Luftwaffe. But the German fighters don't come. They've been bled too hard, lost too many pilots, burned through too much fuel. The sky over the greatest invasion in history belongs to the Allies. Edgar Schmued is in California, thousands of miles from the battle, listening to the radio. His hands shake slightly as he holds his coffee. The voices crackling through the speaker describe chaos on the beaches, heroism in the surf, boys dying in the sand. But they also describe something else. Clear skies, air superiority, the ability to bomb and strafe and support without fear of enemy fighters. Schmued knows what that means. Knows that the plane he designed, the machine born from his mind and his hands, is up there right now, protecting the invasion. He feels pride. He feels guilt. He feels the strange, unbearable responsibility of creation, of knowing that your work kills and saves in equal measure. The Mustangs over Normandy fly mission after mission, their pilots exhausted but relentless. They strafe German convoys trying to reinforce the beaches, their .50 caliber guns ripping through trucks and half-tracks. They hit rail lines, bridges, anything that moves toward the front. They fly so low that pilots can see the faces of enemy soldiers diving for cover, can see the terror in their eyes. It's not glory. It's not the romantic dogfights of propaganda posters. It's brutal, grinding work, the kind that saves thousands of lives on the ground but carves pieces out of the souls of the men doing it. Lieutenant Colonel John D. Landers leads a squadron over the Falaise Pocket in August, where remnants of the German army are trapped and desperate. The roads below are clogged with retreating troops, tanks, horses, wagons. A medieval nightmare playing out in the 20th century. The Mustangs dive again and again, their guns hammering, their wings flashing in the smoke-filled sky. Landers doesn't feel triumphant. He feels sick. War, seen from 500 feet, loses all abstraction. It becomes visceral, personal. The enemy stops being a symbol and becomes men. Men burning, men running, men dying. But the mission doesn't stop. Can't stop. Because every German convoy destroyed is American lives saved. It's the math of survival calculated in blood. By late summer, the Mustang groups are flying deeper into Germany than ever before. They escort bombers to Berlin, to Munich, to targets so deep that the Luftwaffe thought them unreachable. The Germans scramble their remaining fighters in desperate, suicidal attacks, ramming bombers, sacrificing themselves for a single kill. The Mustang pilots intercept them, shoot them down, watch them fall. Some nights, back at the base, the pilots sit in silence, staring at their hands, trying to reconcile the boy they were with the killer they've become. The flight surgeon offers whiskey. The chaplain offers prayers. But nothing really helps except the camaraderie, the shared weight, the knowledge that everyone in the room carries the same scars. Edgar Schmued receives letters from pilots, rare, brief, profound. One pilot writes, "Your plane brought me home when I shouldn't have made it. Thank you." Another writes, "I killed 3 men today in the plane you designed. I don't know how to feel about that." Schmued reads them alone, late at night, and files them away in a drawer he never opens. He doesn't talk about them, doesn't show them to anyone, but they weigh on him like stones, because he understands the terrible truth of his own genius. He created a masterpiece, and masterpieces in wartime are measured in lives taken and lives saved, and you can never balance that equation. The P-51 Mustang had become more than a weapon. It had become the instrument of Allied victory in the air, and the shadow that haunted everyone who flew it, built it, or died because of it. By March 1945, Germany is dying, but it dies hard, clawing and bleeding and refusing to surrender. The cities are rubble, the factories smashed, the railroads severed. But still the Luftwaffe fights, not with the strength of 1940, not with the confidence of experienced aces, but with the desperate fury of cornered men. Boys of 16 fly Me-262 jets with barely 10 hours of training. Old men climb into patched-up FW-190s held together with salvaged parts and prayers. They know they're going to die. They know the war is lost. But they fly anyway because Berlin says fly, because propaganda says fight, because surrender feels like betrayal even when the cause is ashes. And the Mustangs meet them one last time, in the cold spring skies over a shattered Reich. Captain Chuck Yeager, who will later break the sound barrier, leads his squadron over Munich on a hunting sweep. Below, the city burns from the previous night's bombing. Above, a formation of Me-262s appears, sleek and fast, Germany's last desperate bid for technological salvation. The jets are faster than the Mustang in level flight, but they burn fuel like fire burns paper. Yeager doesn't chase them straight. He predicts their path, positions his flight, and waits. When the 262s slow to land, vulnerable and low on fuel, the Mustangs pounce. Yeager's guns hammer. The jet explodes on the runway. Another tries to climb away, doesn't make it. The killing has become mechanical, efficient, almost routine, and that's what haunts the pilots most. There's no glory in shooting down a boy who can barely fly. No honor in strafing an airfield where pilots are too inexperienced to defend themselves. But war doesn't care about honor. It cares about outcomes. And the outcome is written in the spring sky. The Luftwaffe is finished, broken beyond repair. The Mustangs range across Germany unopposed, hitting anything that moves, securing the skies for the final ground offensives. The Third Reich, which once boasted it would rule for 1,000 years, crumbles after 12. And the P-51 Mustang, more than any other fighter, ensured it would never rise again. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler puts a gun to his head in a bunker beneath Berlin. A week later, Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. In England, at airfields across East Anglia, Mustang pilots gather in stunned, exhausted silence. Some cheer, some cry, most just sit, too numb to process that they've survived, that the missions are over, that they can stop counting the empty beds. Ground crews paint final kill marks on fuselages. Some planes have 30, 40, 50 swastikas. The Mustangs, battered and oil-stained and magnificent, sit silent on the tarmac, their work done. They'll never fire their guns in anger again. History has moved on. In California, Edgar Schmued receives a telegram. War in Europe concluded. P-51 instrumental in victory. Thank you. He reads it 3 times, then folds it carefully and places it in his desk drawer. He doesn't celebrate, doesn't open champagne. He walks outside into the California evening, looks up at the sky, peaceful now, empty of contrails and war, and allows himself a long, slow breath. He thinks of the pilots who flew his plane, the ones who came home and the ones who didn't, the German pilots who died under his guns, boys who might have been his neighbors if history had turned differently. He thinks of his homeland, now defeated and occupied, and wonders if any of his family survived. The war is over, but the ghosts remain. The P-51 Mustang flew in the Pacific too, escorting B-29s over Japan, its range perfect for the vast oceanic distances. When the atomic bombs fell and Japan surrendered in August 1945, Mustangs were there, flying patrols over Tokyo Bay as the surrender documents were signed. The plane that began as a desperate British request in 1940 had become the defining American fighter of World War II, 15,000 built, flown by dozens of nations, credited with nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat alone. It saved countless lives, ended countless others, and proved that genius, when coupled with necessity, can change the course of human events. Edgar Schmued's creation had done what it was designed to do, win the war. But late at night, alone in his office, Schmued sometimes wondered if winning was enough to balance the cost, or if some equations can never be solved, only endured. In the end, history remembers the heroes, the pilots, the generals, the men who gave speeches and signed treaties. But wars are won in drafting rooms as much as battlefields, in the quiet minds of engineers who turn impossible problems into elegant solutions. Edgar Schmued never wore a uniform, never fired a shot, never flew into combat. But his pencil carved victory into the sky, his vision gave wings to freedom, and his P-51 Mustang became the instrument that broke tyranny's back. We remember the planes. We should also remember the man who dreamed them into being, not for glory, but because the world needed saving, and he knew how to save it with aluminum, equations, and an immigrant's refusal to let darkness win. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. It helps this channel tremendously to keep bringing you stories like this one. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next untold chapter from history. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? I want to see how far this story has traveled. And before you go, click on the next video appearing in the card above. You're going to be amazed by what comes next.